this looks good.
All right, and now we're moving into our plate of the day for Latinas girls when the Platano ain't enough. So this conversation is driven around the idea that, you know, being in the Latinx culture in general, right? There's a lot of stereotypes, stigmas, and expectations that are placed upon us. I love the new memes that are coming out of like, oh, I don't look Dominican. I'm sorry. I forgot to bring my plátano with me. Oh, I'm like, you know, oh, I'm Salvadorian. Sorry. Forgot to bring pupusas. Like, you know what I mean? Like little things like that. And I think it's true because I think growing up for me, especially like South Bronx born, Harlem born, South Bronx raised, went to middle school there, was around, you know, black and brown kids, went to LaGuardia High School. For the first time, I started to interact with white people outside of doctors, teachers, and things like that. And I had white peers, which was a huge culture shock for me, especially at the in those formative years. But but the sort of caveat for me was like, oh, when I was in my Bronx setting, people would call me Hillary Clinton and white girl and shit like that because I was too white for the black and brown kids. But then when I got to LaGuardia, I will never forget freshman year, somebody came up and they were like, oh, you're from the South Bronx? Wait. So like that means you sleep to the sound of like bullets, right? Like that's what you hear at night when you sleep. And I remember me being in that moment, though, and I was still young and naive, and I was trying to fit in. So I was like, yeah, you know, because the Bronx is so dangerous. And, like, I would play up some of the stereotypes of my culture in order to, like, fit in more. Because in a way, I felt like, oh, okay, this is their way of telling me I'm not them. Like, I'm not one of them. It doesn't matter how many Converse I buy. It doesn't matter how much rock music I listen to or whatever the fuck. I'm not a white person, and so I don't get to claim their culture. And then, you know, in college, I started to slowly migrate back into my Latinidad because I learned the term Afro-Latina. And I was like, holy shit, things make more sense for me now. Like, you know, because there was always a part of, like, black culture that also spoke to me, but I always thought that's just because I'm from the Bronx and not because I knew that there were actually parallels between Dominican culture and black culture because Dominican culture is black culture. So learning that was a huge sort of, like, aha moment for me. But I still find that I have these moments of, like, hey, I am a proud Dominicana. I love me some plátanos, but like, for example, like I hate habichuela con dulce. Like I don't buy like bright color pants and clothes to go out. Like, you know, like there's just certain like stereotypes of the Dominicana that like I'm so far from. And it makes me feel weird about still claiming my Dominicanness. And sometimes I feel like I still need to play it up to, first of all, let these white people know, yes, I'm Dominican and I'm proud. But to let the Dominican know, like, you know, like, nah, I'm still one of you. I am a Dominican woman regardless of how I present. So all of that to say, I'm very curious to hear for you guys, what are the ways that you feel the most connected to your Latinx culture? And then what are the ways in which you feel the most disconnected to your Latinx culture?
So, born and raised in Queens, I grew up in the same way, like surrounded by mostly brown kids, and everybody was, you know, from a different, like, country. There was a mix of everybody, Central, South American. And I lived in like Little Colombia, so my first language was Spanish. And the part that I feel disconnected the most, because it's something that I've always struggled with, is not being able to be super fluent in Spanish. And my whole life, like from the moment I started learning English, like, I don't know, I was like 6 years old, I became super fluent. And from then on, I was like, I don't want to speak Spanish. All my friends speak English. Even if they were from Hispanic households, like, that's just what it was. And, you know, my mom would always call me Americana, like, not like real Latina. And the more that I felt ashamed about it, the more I didn't want to speak it. And it would kill me. And even to this day, I have a hard time speaking in Spanish to my mom. But I love Spanish. It's such a great language. And I'm actually more fluent than most people would think to give me credit for, but I can have a whole conversation in Spanish. I lived in South America for like 4 months, and it was like amazing. It was like the best, the most Latina I've ever felt. And then to come back and it's like, all right, like, how do you balance that? You know, I want to be like perfect, but then I'm also American. And then also not looking the way people expect me to look. So when I say I'm half Dominican, they're like, what? Are you sure? Like, what? Like, that's always the biggest surprise. And then I feel bad because, not just because of how I look, because, you know, everybody comes in different shapes, looks, sizes, colors, everything. And that's something that's like not too bad. But then I don't have the Dominican accent when I speak, or, you know, I don't know about the history. I've never even been to DR. I'm actually going in 2 weeks. I'm so excited.
Yes, girl. I can't wait to hear about that. Yeah. I love hearing people's first time.
Yeah, so that's just something that I've always been like, when am I gonna feel like a real Latina? And then to come out with a game that's all about Latinidad, my whole family's like, what? They're just so like not confused. Like everyone's proud, everyone's supportive, but they're kind of just like, where did this come from? And it really did come from exploring the culture, getting out of the U.S., which I encourage every single U.S.-born Latino to do, especially the younger generation, because it's something that I've realized through this game, you know, through customers and fans, followers, whatever, that a lot of people are like me. And the one thing I've learned in the year that, you know, has been Tragos is you don't have to speak perfect Spanish. You don't even have to speak Spanish at all to call yourself Latino. And to, you know, say your name with the R roll, and you don't even have to roll your R's perfectly, because I can't roll my R's to feel Latino. Just as long as you embrace that culture, that's enough. Right. No matter what anybody says. And then the one thing that I do feel most connected with is the food.
I mean, because really, truly, and there's so many cultures with great food, but Latinx food is just like God. We cook, man. And honestly, we handle our meats very well. And I mean that in both senses. Okay. We handle our meats very What happened was you were sipping and looking down, and we were like, on the microphone. Sticking our tongues out on the mic. No, but I think our food, and I love that even within Latinx food, like there are subcategories, because pupusas, and I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah, pupusas
are not the same as eating, you know, Mexican food, not the same as eating Dominican food. And honestly, like even between Dominican, Puerto Rican food and Cuban food, there's a lot of similarities, but there's always a little difference in the sazon or something that people do. Like Boricuas love to put coconut in their rice, and like a Dominican might do that, but that's not like standard. You know what I mean? And it's not standard for Boricuas either, but I feel like every time somebody's grandmother would mix the rice, somehow there's some cocoa milk or something makes it in the recipe. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's always these nuances that makes it exciting. And so when I go to a Latinx restaurant, even though I know I'm gonna get rice, beans, and whatever, the shit hits different every time. And I love me some Colombian food. Let me tell you,
really,
so good.
A lot of people like. I mean, it's not the most amazing. I'm not gonna lie. Like I would say that
fuck with it.
It's so good, like in itself, you know.
Yeah.
Especially like U.S. Colombian food. I don't know. Colombia's doing something different, but that's another topic.
I had one of my somebody who's like probably not even technically my cousin by how many generations removed we are, married somebody who is from Colombia. And so every time their daughter had a birthday party, for one reason or another, like they catered with Colombian food and not Dominican food. So once a year, I always looked forward to going to these parties, because what I don't even remember. It was like rice, beans, something about the chicken tasted better. And they were just like, even though the texture of the beans was different than the texture of the beans that my mom would make. And it was always slamming. So, you know, I'm gonna take your word for it, but my experience so far, Colombian food, I fuck with it. I fuck with it for sure. Skittles, what about you? How do you feel most connected, and where are you disconnected?
I feel like my answer is probably going to be the very same thing as Carolina. I am not a fluent Spanish speaker, so that's the disconnect for me. And I think that for me, it was literally that the reason being was that my family was full of teachers teaching in English speaking schools, and so English was just what I grew up speaking first, and just picking up. And then growing up whenever I would try to speak Spanish, the being made fun of made me feel ashamed and then scared. Yeah. And I called the other day.
I'm the one.
The other day I even called my mother out, and I was like, "Yo, like you make fun of me for not knowing how to speak Spanish, but this is the exact reason why I don't try because
I say
of
the
that,
same
you know."
thing every 5 years.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the not being able to speak, but feeling connected. I think that my mother did a very good job of really allowing having us embrace our culture in the sense of like you know, I've been cooking since I was 11 years old, and like I'm talking like fresh sofrito and all this stuff, you know, knowing like the key meals to make, just the way that I was brought up. My father's a salsero, so I knew all the like salsa stuff, and I've listened to it, brought to Puerto Rico every year. So I was able to really connect in that sense of like being able to go to Puerto Rico and know the family there, and
you would enjoy those moments. Like, would you say that you have like a loving relationship with like salsa or some of these things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's always like a sense of pride and a connection to it. And it brings me back to just relationships with my father and my family and stuff like that. The pride in like my family story and like how my grandmother came, and like knowing all those details and stuff like that. I'm actually working on a documentary with my mom about my grandmother's life because of stuff like that. So I feel very connected with my culture in that sense of like how I was brought up and the things that I was taught and appreciation. But the speaking Spanish, and then what should Spanish girl say, being this like person that's recognizable to a lot of Latinos, but still not having that like
for
fluent,
yourself.
Yeah,
and it's like for me, I think my wanting to, because I feel like at one point that like, oh well, I'm gonna separate myself from Dominicans as much as possible when I was in the community before sort of transitioning into this wider space, came from, I don't know how I got certain wokeness at a young age, but I always felt that there was something wrong with the way women functioned in the Latinx society in terms of being the ones who clean and cook. And I was always like, oh, you know, my brother would be like, ma, tráeme jugo. And then she'd pour the juice, and then she'd be like, here, go take this to your brother, right? And then I'd go with the cup and I'd take it to my brother. I'm like, why this nigga can stay in his bed and I gotta when I want juice and stuff, I gotta get up and get it myself. Like little things like that. I think really justice is like one of my like core values. So when I think something is even slightly unjust, I mean like even like I can see like, oh wow, they gave them 2 pieces of chicken and just me 1 piece of chicken. Why? Which actually just happened at the last restaurant. Why I brought it up. But like, you know what I mean? So like for me, it was just like, fuck out of here. Like I actually was deeply connected to a lot of aspects of Dominican culture that I quickly was like, no, unplug me right the fuck now, because I'm not that bitch. Like I'm not about to be living. And so a lot of that resistance came from that, and I didn't really have, and to be clear, my mom is a very independent, strong-willed woman, so it's not like she's some like domesticated whatever, but you know, she did, just like I'm first generation, so like she came here, her jobs were like, you know, babysitting, baking, like, and so a lot of the work that she did still kept her within the household even though she was working. But for me, I was just like, no, I need to get the fuck out. No, I need to be rich. Fuck marrying a rich dude, though. I'm happy to marry a rich man if you'll have me, but like I can make my own money, like I can do my own shit. And so that then made me disconnected from the cooking. That then made me disconnected from the idea that, oh, when I go to parties, I need to know how to dance, and I need to dress a certain way, and I need to have makeup on and get to go to the salon and get my hair done. And anytime I participated in those things, it was because I was forced in a way. It was like my mom was like, you know, you're not about to just show up however you want, right? Baja al salón de un pronto, o si no, deja que yo te pase ese blower, y la ropa, y esto, y lo otro. And like all of that stuff was just so drilled, and I felt like I needed to run away. But now that I'm in my adulthood, I find like an eagerness to be like, damn, I've never cooked rice before. You know what I mean? Like I've never attempted.
I feel like that's
you know
a
what
video
I mean?
we should do, because I'm a pro rice cooker.
Right? Yeah, no, for real. The other day I was at Skittle's house and he cooked so fast. I was just like, wow.
When I did, I whipped up. I was like.
Right, it was like literally like he hit a button and then like this meal appeared, and I was like, and I know how to cook, but like I like quinoa and shit like that. My mom always goes, I know, esta se cree que está cocinando gourmet. No, esta cocina gourmet, right? And like that, but I like to cook, but I'm not necessarily cooking those dishes. And like, I love Latinx music. I love, like, when I asked Skittles that question, that was more because I'm like, I stay listening to certain salsa music, and even though that's more Boricua, but I love my bachata, I love my merengue. Like, Juan Luis Guerra any day. Like, I listen to him weekly probably, right? But I don't always find that like most of my friends have that connection to the music. So I feel like that's a piece of me that I enjoy, but only get to enjoy around the viejos. So like when I'm around other old people. And I don't find that my friends really fuck with especially like the old school shit. Like people don't really fuck with it. So I find like I don't get to share my Latinx music passion with anyone. It's really hard. And then in the rare moments where you're in a room with your friends and that one bachata song comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, so you know this song? Yeah, this shit is blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And then I get excited because it's not just, I'm not listening to Romeo Santos. I mean, I do, but that's not my main. I'm listening to the old dude who I can't even name, who's like, whoever made that song, like, I like that, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the shit I'm really on. So yeah, definitely hear what you guys are saying, but I wonder for you guys, and I'm even trying to think for myself what that moment might have been. Has there ever been a moment where you wished you were something else than what you are?
Ooh.
Culture-wise. Or gender-wise. I mean, if you ever wanted to be a cat, I don't
know. Well, gender-wise, I mean, there's always been points where I wondered what it would be like to be a girl and not have to be a gay man.
But cultural context,
different conversation. Culture context. Damn, you know, I've always been pretty proud to be Boricua, you know, and I think that comes with the upbringing too. Like you've mentioned it before, how like when we were growing up, Puerto Ricans were everywhere, you know, and it's interesting being a teacher now how that's not the case and how the Puerto Rican students seek me out. I guess it's also me being a
because y'all went to Florida.
That number one, but also being a music teacher in like a white classical, like whatever. Yeah, I've always been pretty proud to be Boricua though. I think if there was another culture that I would say I might want to try out or something, I would probably be like, I don't know, maybe I'd like trying to be like either Dominican or really I would leave it and be like West Indian. Like I want to be like Jamaican or something.
Yeah, like Caribbean.
Like,
the Caribbean is lit.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to be part of a different culture? Are you still like U.S. born or? You know?
Oh, I mean, I guess I didn't even think that far into the question. Just like because for me, like, yes, I'm U.S. born, but like I grew up in a Dominican household, and so like being in America only permeated that filter as far as like it needed to. So like the way schools function being different than what Dominican schools function like, but that's only because that's how it is. But in the walls of my house, there was nothing American. It was a Dominican house.
I've never thought of that question.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, I have some answers, but I definitely want to.
I feel like, I have Jamaican. That West Indian, like, I would stay in our little sea, though, our Caribbean sea. Right. I wouldn't venture out anywhere else.
Okay. No, wait, I have thought about it.
Random things. Like, you don't think about it often. Like, it's not, like, in your heart. But, like, you think, you know, like, what else might I be?
Okay, so I guess I've never really like dwelled on it because people have always thought I'm from somewhere else in the world. So I've gone Albanian, Egyptian, Greek,
and I can see all of those. It's the dark hair thing, I think. Yeah.
So I've always thought like, okay, well, I guess if I had to change my culture, I'd be Indian because one of my best friends is Indian.
You see how she corrected one of.
I don't want problems. One of them is Indian, and every time we're together in a Hispanic neighborhood, everyone like goes up to her because I guess she looks friendlier, I don't know, and they'll speak to her in Spanish because then they think she's Latina, and then she's always like hanging out, like having me hang out with her Indian friends. And then people will like forget that I'm Indian, so they'll talk to me sometimes in Hindi. I'm just like, whoa. So I think I would fit into that country really well if I had to like ever live there or whatever. But I mean, that's as far as that goes.
And Indian people have some banging food. I love Indian food.
I love
so
Indian food.
I wouldn't hate being in India for that. You know, ironically, I think like I used to think about this question a lot, but I wouldn't think of it in the context of like, ooh, like if I could have a different life, like for myself and start from scratch, and more so, okay, so when I marry, because I want to incorporate this culture in my life, who am I gonna marry, and like limiting like what men I would want to date to the culture that I knew I couldn't, because whatever, it's
That's
a fantasy.
very strategic.
It's a fantasy, right? Like there's no way I'm gonna like wake up one day and be a different race or represent a different ethnic background, but I can marry into it. So my thing for several years growing up, I'm ashamed, and I'm ashamed just in the sense of it came from a place of not understanding colonization and just history and all that stuff. I had a white boy thing, right? But to me, the particular white boy I wanted to marry for some reason, I wanted to marry an Irish man. I was so no, hear me out. Wait. Let me get into it, right? So I always wanted to marry Irish. First it started, and this is from a young age. I want you to understand. I have a lot of shit. I could write a whole book about what the shit that goes in my head. From a very young age, and I'm talking like second grade. Okay. Because green was my favorite color, I always... Yes. I am being vulnerable right now. Because green was my favorite color. You know, I loved St. Patrick's Day. Because I loved St. Patrick's Day, I was always jealous because it always fucked with me that like of all, like everything was like an American holiday. But then for some reason, all the stores and stuff would transform for this random ass white people holiday, right? Like all of a sudden there's like shamrocks everywhere. And I'm like, yo, Irish people are popping, because I know other cultures have holidays, but they don't transform everything like for them. So, and then Mexicans for Cinco de Mayo, but I always knew Mexicans got the most play in terms of Latinos. So I'd just be like, all right, whatever, Cinco de Mayo. But like, I was like, damn, that's lit. And I'm like, oh, this idea of like Lucky Charms even. And I'm like, I know that shit ain't real, but like, wow, the history behind that. And I swore I would marry an Irishman. And then I started getting into like even like redheads. And I was like, wow, like maybe I could have a mixed child that looked this way. And I was fascinated by it. And then I started to pick up, like, you know, you start getting older and you get the scope of the world, and I started to associate Boston as a very Irish town. So when I was applying to colleges, heavy applications in Boston, because I'm telling you, I got woke. I'm admitting I got actually woke in college, but before college I still really very much had these goals. So yeah, so heavy. I used to say I'm gonna start watching hockey to be a Brewers fan, because I cannot be a Red Sox fan because I'm from the Bronx.
Extensive.
It is, I'm telling you. But I was a Patriots fan for football because it was Boston, and I knew Irishmen. Like there were so many, and I was deeply dedicated to this idea of marrying an Irish boy, because I just wanted to be Irish. But I think that really came from a place of wanting to be white, like, and not wanting to, but like wanting to have access to a white culture. And then like you get older, and then you understand, oh, Irish people are known for drinking and blah blah, you know. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's basically like Dominicans, right? They like to party, they like to be lit. So it's the same, except they're different. So I always wanted to marry an Irish man, and sometimes British. So like depending on what month you caught me, and when Harry Potter came out, I used to have a huge crush on that motherfucker. Now I'm like,
so now if we're gonna switch the question to like, what culture would you want to marry into? I absolutely would want to marry a Nigerian man. Ooh. I just want a nice, just like Nigerian daddy. Like Adiza, one of my best friends is Bayesian and Nigerian, and her cousins, girl, family reunions.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And her father is the Nigerian one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and he's an attractive older man.
Yes.
Adiza, don't kill me. I'm not coming for your father. But I'm just saying, like, you know, as far as dads go, he's not some old wrinkly, like, okay, that's Adiza's dad. It's like, okay, that's
Adiza's that entire dad. Family.
They're an attractive. Yeah. I mean, their mom is her mom is like. Anyway, but yeah. So Nigerian, do you have a now? I mean, now that
Now that the question has been posed.
Right.
So I resonated a lot with what you were saying. I didn't go as far as that.
Yeah, no, I'm fucking crazy. Don't.
I will say, though, my connection to that story is that I've always been in love with Chris Evans.
Ooh.
And I get made fun of a lot for this because he's like the most basic looking white man.
He really is.
But I love him. I love it. I love his personality. I feel like we had this connection. I'm in a relationship now. And I always had this idea, like I've always been to white guys because I guess, growing up with like a different vocabulary than my friends, I never felt like I was, Latina enough. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I blend in with my white friends more. I'll probably marry like a white guy or British guy, like somebody blonde. Like I love blondes.
Ooh, see? I don't like blonde.
I don't like
I'll
blonde.
go
Brunettes.
redheads too. Yeah.
Blonde for me, for some reason. I feel like that's when I was like, nah, you white. You a white man. I don't want white man. I want an Irish man.
I mean, there are blonde Irish
No,
men.
there absolutely
I don't
are.
know.
Yeah, there absolutely are.
But, for the first time, I'm actually dating a Latino.
Wow.
Yeah.
What country is he repping?
Peru.
Oh, Peru.
And it's not just because of the relationship, but I would 100% marry into a Peruvian family. Because I've been to Peru, the food, not to bring up food again, but like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's like one of the top in the country. I mean, the world.
Is it Peruvians that eat salchipapas? Or am I bugging? No.
Yeah, because it's in
I mean,
Pio
they do
Pio?
it.
Pio
yeah.
Pio is
Yeah, yeah.
Peruvian, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I think that dish goes across different countries, but they're mostly known for their like lomo saltado, like ceviche, and
Ceviche.
oh my goodness. So there's that. The people are very nice. Like it's a very friendly country, and my boyfriend like has a family of like 300 people just in New York, New Jersey, and they're just amazing, and I'll probably marry into that family.
Okay, and so last question on this is, why do we think, if you agree that it is important to celebrate one's culture even when you're not connected to it? So that question really comes from a place for me that I am still to this day continuing to learn Dominican history. I studied Latinx culture as a minor in college, so that was like my first surge of like a shit ton of information, but like really a shit ton of information comprised of maybe 5 different countries, but we have 20 plus Spanish speaking countries. So I've yet to really dig into everything, but I find that sometimes when I ask my Latinx friends that represent some of these countries, I'm like, oh, can you shed some light? And they're like, I have no fucking clue, because they don't teach us that. The American educational system is not one that is catering to the multitudes of culture that it represents, especially in a place like New York, because New York pretty much, I feel like if you tried to pick a city that had one person from every country in the world, New York City would be that city, right? So do you guys think it's important to celebrate and really familiarize yourselves with these cultures, even if it's just as far as history, even when you're not connected?
I mean, yeah, I think just the for knowing where you're from and like having pride in where you come from. I don't like this. I like the idea that like the US is this melting pot and we're all like having sex with each other and creating mutts and stuff like that. But I don't know. I just think that there's like a certain pride in just knowing where you're coming from and where certain things, even if your family is, even more so if your family is a family that doesn't like uphold the certain traditions because they've assimilated so much. I think just like for the purpose of knowing about your culture. And I feel like I'm that person that has friends that I'm like, don't forget you're Dominican, or don't forget you're this, for like my like more assimilated friends. Like your last name is Torres, Ali,
Right.
so but yeah, I just think it's important, period. I don't know.
I mean, I 100% agree, and I think it's something that we've all touched on, not feeling enough of who we are, and to know that we do have this background, but not really know too much about it. Sometimes everybody has like some identity crisis at some point in their life,
Right.
And to have a culture as rich as ours, I would say, is it's super helpful in finding out who you are and being proud of it, but. It's like, why be proud? Like, what's the point of being proud of a country, especially if you don't live there?
Right.
But, once you look at the rest of the world and see people's histories and see like who we are. It's almost like, why be proud of being human, you know? Like we all have our own tendencies and things that make us who we are. It's not just about our food and our music, which is awesome, but it's also about like what values do we uphold, what makes us unique, what makes us better parents or better people in general.
Right.
And so looking back at what our parents did, you know, hard workers, like this work ethic, which is something you see a lot in Latinos. It's like, oh, that's where I got that from. Not to say that I'm going to be like, you know, cleaning floors, but it gives you a different type of drive than just being like, oh, now I have to work for the rest of my life. Or, you know, it gives you different motivations in different parts of your life. And again, like those values that you uphold, whether it's like for your future family or, you know, for whatever profession you have in your life, the people around you, like it's all affected.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, like, I think when I learned I was Afro-Latina, yes, it was a big explosive moment in me finding how I could exist within the nuance of the culture that I represent. But I think that the older I've gotten, what I understand the most is that the lack of understanding our history as Latinos, period, in all the countries, has put us in a position where we don't actually see the value in understanding our history because we don't understand the accomplishments. So we very much view ourselves the way America has taught us to view where we come from and not actually getting to just know it for what it is without having an American filter over it. And so for me, it's more about freeing your mind. And it doesn't actually have anything to do with, oh, and now that I learned this, like, you know how some people like go to Africa and then they come back with their African name. I'm not saying you have to go. I'm not saying you have to go, you know what I mean, to Uruguay and get like your, you know, indigenous name because like, you know, but if you do want to do that, great, right? Because then that'll be a response from an honest assessment of what the reality is of the history from whence you came is. So I think for me as a Dominican, it's been interesting because I've always had a lot of Dominican pride, just because of the household I was raised in. But the more that I've learned, the more that I'm like, wow, like I'm proud, but I'm also very disappointed. I'm also very disappointed with the way in which we've allowed our economy to be controlled by other people, which then informs the way I make decisions when I'm on the island. So like, wow, I love being in resorts and shit like that. I'm a bit more conscious about how I'm spending my dollar when I'm on the island because I understand that filtering it through, you know, these hotel and resort shits is really just filtering it into European and white markets. You know, and or understanding that like I had to learn I was Afro-Latina, and even if I was in DR, I might have not learned that because we are a self-hating people when it comes to our blackness, and like understanding that and freeing my mind from that was important. And so whether I choose to stick within the norms of what I'm learning or not, I now can have an honest assessment of where I stand on my identity. Because at the end of the day, while you never have to care what other people think of you, people are always going to view you through the lens of who you are. Whether you're a woman, and then after you're a woman, it's your nationality. And quite frankly, if you're a black woman, it's your black first, and then you're a woman. And then, you know what I mean? And then people will categorize me. So if I'm walking around as a loud and proud Dominicana, I'd never want to be in a position where somebody could try to tell me about myself. And I don't at least have an understanding of it, even if I don't know the dates and numbers and data, that I don't have an understanding of the truth of what's happening in my country, because it's not my country, but it's my country. It is the source of the nuances of how I was socialized because my parents socialized me as Dominican. So I think that's why it's important.
I mean, I just really want to piggyback off of that because it's an amazing point. And also, like, you think about such a growing population in the U.S., it's really no longer like accept your culture and just be your culture, be your parents, or reject it entirely and, you know, try to be white. It's trying to be like the next generation, that 2.0 version of the people that brought us here. And if you don't accept it, then you're kind of just, you know, letting a culture die or letting people decide for you what that culture is for you. And that's the last thing you want in a place where we are growing in numbers. So it's like, why, like we should be defining that, not others.
Absolutely. And just to your point of growing numbers, like I forget what year it is that they say that like the Latinx population will be higher than the white population here in the United States. And like, okay, fuck the nuances. Fuck if you know how to speak Spanish, dance salsa, or make a pot of rice, right? do you understand that banding together with this marker, which quite frankly, Latinos didn't choose to be marked as this one, hegemonic group. We were placed that way.
Yeah.
But how do we then leverage that to take our power back and say, oh, well, if we are now the majority, then that means we are the majority within economies. We are the majorities of people, starting businesses and doing these things. So how do we really control the narrative away from a white narrative and make it our narrative? And that is a collective goal, but it is an unrealistic goal if we don't actually understand the source of the things that make us different. And like when we think about marketing, even like when we were talking about your game, it's like, all right, who's this being marketed to, right? So like, yes, now it's hitting one group, but you're even saying eventually we might have to hit these other places because there's different groups and different people interpret things different ways, but there's so much power in our numbers. And I'll end with this. Watching John Leguizamo's Latin History for Morons, I took my dad when it was here in New York on Broadway, and we took my dad, me and my sister, to watch it. And the show was super informative. It lacked a little bit in Afro-Latino history, which I was kind of like, meh, but he's also not Afro-Latino, so I was like, all right, that's fine. It's not your story to tell. I almost started crying watching my father watching the show because as much history as my father knew, there's a part in the play where John Leguizamo's really like spitting out facts and is like, in this war in American history, did you know it was actually Puerto Rican who did this, and did you know that it was a Colombian who did that, and back in indigenous times, did you know, like we know about Pocahontas, did you know about this person, and just like bringing out history stories that literally you'd have to do research. There's not just like easily accessible information. And I was just like, bro, like and he says something, and I'm paraphrasing, if white people let us know just how powerful we are, just from what we've already done, let alone what we could do, like they would be in trouble. Because the amount of pride you feel, the same way they have George Washington's, Christopher Columbus's, and blah, blah, blah. If we knew all of ours in those realms, like we would be acting like our shit don't stink. We'd be so come mierda as a race because we have that much to be proud about. Yeah. So, yeah. And that's all period. So that's all period. Shout out to Deja. All right. So thank you so much, Carolina, for being with us today. We are super excited that you joined us. Let us know any upcoming things to look out for, any shout outs you have, and where can we find you?
Okay. So I'll start backwards. So you can find Tragos on social media. We're scaling. We want to do YouTube very soon.
Ooh.
Yes.
Get in there. The content speaks for itself, but for now we're at Dragos Game on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and you could find us on dragosgame.com, our own website, and on Amazon. And what's coming up? So we definitely want to be distributed more. Right now we are all online, so we'd love to look at some wholesale opportunities, be in like physical stores.
Keep seeing the Target logo in my head. I'm not a bruja, but sometimes I be seeing shit. So I'm just keep seeing Target as you're talking.
I love Target.
Yes.
People know I'm obsessed with it, and I'm not the only one.
Right.
It's it's that rebrand. I don't know. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, definitely being in physical stores and being in actual locations. People are always like, I need it for my birthday, and then we don't make it in time, and it breaks everyone's heart. And it's like, no. So that's definitely what we want to do. That's literally only reason why we're on Amazon, so we could be on Prime, so we could be more accessible.
Right.
There's that, and then of course thinking about what the next expansion pack is going to be. How do we make it more interesting? Love getting feedback from people who play and seeing like what those next packs will be. Will they be themed? Will they be, just general? We kind of go back and forth between do we want it to apply to everybody to make them feel united, or do we want to really dive into certain subcultures and countries because that's what makes people so happy?
I was literally thinking that in my head. I was like, even if it took a long time, like the longevity of this game, like being years, I think part of that is like, well, yeah, the game lives on, and like this year we released these 5 countries, and the other year we released these 5 countries. I don't know. Listen, put us on your team. We will drop in some ideas for y'all for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the fun part, aside from like the whole business aspect, which luckily it's become a business. It's not something that we ever really imagined scaling to the point that it's at. We already have like 5 team members, all Latinas, coincidence, but they're all amazing.
Yes.
So I will give a shout out to them. They're all
Tragos
incredible.
team.
We're a remote team. I would say like half of us are in New York, but we have someone in LA that's traveled everywhere. Laura, I'll like give you a shout out. We have someone in Spain, Marjorie. I've known her from high school, and everyone's just like a different culture. So it's just an amazing experience in general. And there's a lot more to come. You can follow us to find out more.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then tragos.com.
Tragosgame.com.
Tragosgame.com and at Tragosgame on Instagram.
Absolutely. Skittles, where can they find us?
And you guys can find us at Ladies Who Brunch on Instagram, Ladies Who Brunch on YouTube, Ladies Brunch on Twitter. And you can listen to us on all of your favorite streaming platforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. And until next time, bronche. Bronche, bronche. That's how we say brunch.
Here's to the ladies who say basic with their love.